College with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Jerry Carter. We're talking on a Tuesday. I had some traveling to do this week, and we'll talk about that a little later on with catching some NLDS baseball, Nats, and Dodgers. But we're going to start talking, Jerry. We'll start talking some ACC basketball. We're not that far off from the opening tip. Doesn't seem right that we're only about a month or less than a month away from ACC basketball. So, man, oh, man, the year is flying by on us here, Jerry.
And we're still celebrating the last game of the regular, or the end of last season. So that makes the time look even more out of whack. It seems like just the other day they were cutting down some nets and hanging a banner. But Chris, my first question going into Charlotte, and again, you mentioned last week that the basketball does it all in a day. So let's go right off the bat. Is there anything that while you were down there you learned about Tony Bennett and his guys that you didn't know when you left?
Well, I gotta say, I didn't get to go to Charlotte. Because I was in D.C. Just got back from D.C. In fact, as we're recording this podcast, about an hour ago, the trip to D.C. But that said, we've got Jerry Ratcliffe down there, his son Scott, and I've already been able to pour through the transcripts because the day's actually still going on. As we're recording this, they still got about an hour and a half to go to get through everybody. I think Carolina might be last on the roster today, Tuesday, as we're recording this. So, but they got the important people out of the way first. Duke and UVA were this morning on this marathon day for the writers down in Charlotte, and I would say what I was looking for if I had been able to make the trip. It's one of those things. In reading through the transcripts that I was sent, you can tell that. Okay, so for those of us who have written a book about UVA basketball's 2018-2019 national championship season, the questions about, oh gosh, you overcame UMBC, you won the championship, how's this year been, et cetera, that's kind of old news for those of us who were that close. But what I really wanted to get into with this team and the 2019-2020 UVA basketball team is just how different this team's going to be. And there was a focus on that. Coach Bennett, coaches pick who they take with them on these visits. Every school takes two players, and Coach Bennett decided to take with him Braxton Key and Mamdi Diakite. And those two guys are going to be important guys in lots of ways. They're also veteran guys, both seniors on this team. But yeah, this team's going to be different than last year's team. And so that's what I was looking for is just talking with Tony about the sense of just how different it's going to be without the big three from last year, without DeAndre Hunter, Kyle Guy, and Ty Jerome, to start beginning answering those questions about the new year for UVA basketball.
Well, in the situation, and in the past, Chris, when we've talked about this year and even keeping an eye on next year as far as the upcoming roster, if you will, for 1 year down the road. What do you think will be the focus for this year? I mean, one of the things that Coach K is always talking about in regards to Duke is making sure that each team has its own identity and it's their season. So you mentioned Diakite and Braxton. What for this? Trying to get the fans ready for what to expect from this season. What would you offer the folks listening?
Well, and this will be inside basketball, but that's why you listen to this podcast. So I'll give you the sense, but it's going to be sort of X's and O's heavy in a sense. Last year's team was so good because, one, you had three NBA talents in Jerome and Guy and Hunter. But not just you can have NBA talents and not win, a championship. I mean, look at the Duke team, look at a lot of Kentucky teams in recent years. Tremendous talent, but it doesn't always translate into winning the games at the end when you need to. And I thought what Coach Bennett did so well last year was take tremendous talent, but also utilize it very, very well. And I'm a guy who watches a lot of NBA basketball. I follow it very closely. I write about it some, not as much as I do college basketball, certainly. But I'll talk about the Golden State Warriors for a second, then I'll talk about this UVA basketball team. Just the Golden State Warriors, of course, get all the acclaim because they've played in 5 straight finals. They won 3 of those, and they have a lot of talent. Now they'll go into this season with some injuries and have to overcome, and this year may be a little different than the past 5, certainly. But when you've got Steph Curry, when you had for a few years Kevin Durant, you've got Draymond Green, you got Klay Thompson as your core, as your nucleus, you say, wow, there's a lot of talent there. No wonder they won a lot of basketball games. But a key to that group was the ability of especially Draymond Green to be able to defend any position on the court. And Golden State popularized the term death lineup because they bring Andre Iguodala, another guy who could guard every position on the court. And suddenly, you had for stretches, and they would play their death lineup for those key stretches in the fourth quarter when you needed to not only score points but also clamp down and prevent the other team from scoring points. And you can't play your death lineup for 48 minutes in an NBA game. You can't play them for 40 minutes in a college game, but you can put them out there for the key stretches. And with that defensive flexibility that Green and Iguodala gave that team and give that team, because there's Iguodala's gone now, but for the 5 years there, they gave that team, and also Durant, underrated defensive player, but wow, he could also defend multiple positions on the floor. He can't quite guard point guards. He's not overmatched terribly against point guards and switches, but he can guard 2s all the way to 5s. So it's that defensive flexibility that I thought made those Golden State teams so good. So get back to UVA basketball then, and DeAndre Hunter was a number 4 pick in the draft. And he, a lot of folks compare him to Kawhi Leonard. I think of him as much or maybe more like Draymond Green. And I think the reason the Atlanta Hawks took DeAndre Hunter with the 4th pick is because the GM with the Hawks is a former assistant GM under Golden State in the Golden State front office. And they've got their Trae Young. They've got their Steph Curry and Trae Young. And now they drafted DeAndre Hunter to be their Draymond Green. They're trying to build similarly to the way Golden State built. And so with UVA, DeAndre was Draymond. I kind of looked at Braxton Key as sort of the Iguodala, a guy who can guard, multiple positions. And so last year you had 2 guys that you could put in your death lineup who could guard anybody. And so anytime, and if you got caught in switches, you got caught off screen and rolls, you didn't have to worry about those guys on the floor. And defensively, you could clamp people down. I'm thinking of that Carolina game down at Chapel Hill, when you're down 13, 14 points in the second half, and then you just take Kobe White out of the game. You take everybody out of the game from Carolina's perspective, and you keep them off the scoreboard for a 10-minute stretch. The second half, you win the game. So that was last year's team. He played 4 guard lineup 75% of the time last year. You had your best 3 players were guards. You could defend anybody. This year's team's different. Not just because you're missing your big 3, but you're also missing Hunter's defensive flexibility. Now, you still have Key, but you've also got this year your best players are bigs. Last year, your best players were the backcourt guys. This year, your best players are bigs. We'll count Braxton Key as a big. He's 6'8", but he can play. He can bring the ball up the floor for you. He can play guard offensively, but he can guard anybody. But you've also got Diakite, a 6'9" shot blocker, one of the best shot blockers in the country, especially for his size. You've got Jay Huff, who in limited minutes is an even better shot blocker than Diakite. You've got Francisco Cafaro, who's a redshirt freshman, didn't play last year, but in the FIBA U19 World Cup was a big player for Argentina. 9 rebounds a game, great shot blocker. So your best players this year are your bigs. Your backcourt's inexperienced. Last year your backcourt had all that loads of experience. This year it's Kihei Clark, another guy whose best attributes on defense. You've got some young guys then. You've got Cody Statman, who also in that FIBA U19 for Australia was so key. Averaged 10.3 points a game, 46% shooting from the floor, but he didn't play a lot for UVA last year. You've got a JUCO transfer, Tomas Wolden-Tensai, 47% three-point shooter, but he's got to make the jump from JUCO to ACC. And then you've got Casey Morsell. Morsell is a 4-star recruit at point guard, and expect him to play a lot, but he's a young guy. So you got inexperience in the backcourt. You've got loads of experience in the front court. This year's team's going to be different. And Tony Bennett talked today about how we really don't know yet, and we won't know for a while how it's all going to work out. I just talked about your 8-man rotation. It's going to be interesting to see, especially early on. You start with Syracuse. You've got Carolina in early December. There's going to be some lumps early. I think this team's going to be good. It's very talented, but it's going to play very differently than last year's team, Jerry.
Well, it's funny that you would mention that there at the end, because I'm thinking the exact same thing. for the Duke squad coming into next year. It's going to be different, and as odd as it might sound, with Zion and Barrett and Reddish gone, Chris, I'm not sure that Duke's not. I know they're going to have a deeper team this year. I'm not sure they're not going to have a more balanced and, dare say it, a better team because of the combination of this time, with Jones coming back, Joey Baker coming back, your seniors coming back, and then another class. It's going to have a completely different look. But I think it's going to end up working out well for them. So we talk about, Duke and UVA at the top. Carolina has reloaded in a way that I can't remember them reloading in recent years. And Louisville's on its way up. Is there anybody else you want to, and we'll call it the way too early breakdown, is there anybody else that you think is a serious contender for this year's ACC Basketball Men's Championship?
I think you've talked about the four that, to me, seem to be the serious contenders. Louisville, on paper, has to be, and they are in a lot of folks' minds, the favorite, not necessarily because, Louisville's got a lot of talent. Jordan Nwora is probably the best player coming back in the ACC. I'm a little biased towards Mamadi Diakite, and I look forward to seeing what he can do. And also Jay Huff. I love Jay Huff, and I think that now that Jack Salt's sort of out of the way, and Huff will have a chance to get some more minutes. If he can grab those minutes, I think Jay Huff can put some big numbers up on the board. But we have to see that happen first. But Louisville brings a lot back. Now the problem with Louisville is they bring a lot back from a group that played well for long stretches. They had twice against Virginia, had big leads, lost both those games. Had a huge lead against Duke, lost that game. Couldn't finish. Now, is that because the guys who now went to the NBA, the Duke kids who went to the NBA, the UVA kids who went to the NBA, now they're gone, they're out of the way, and maybe that helps Louisville out. I don't know, but they do they do have the most experienced team coming back. But I don't know. I don't know. I didn't vote them my favorite in the ACC. But and Duke, you talk about. One thing about Coach K, I like a lot of coaches, but he will shorten his bench as the season goes on. He'll figure out who he wants to play, and then he'll play those guys. I don't know that I could buy to the idea that they're going to be better this year. They lost. Those kids, they didn't win a championship. But man, oh man, if just one season together, but the amount of talent on the floor, it's hard to imagine that even with balance they'll be better. They'll be good. It's Duke, and Coach K knows how to put people in the right places. But and Trey Jones is an experienced point guard coming back, second year though he may be. Carolina has a lot of guys coming in, but they don't have a lot of experience coming back. It's all three of those teams. I think, and I don't know if I'm putting them in any kind of order, but Duke, UVA, UNC are the three most talented teams, in my opinion, in the ACC, and that's why I can't go with Louisville as the number one team because I just can't do it. Because I think that the other three are more talented. The advantage Louisville's got is that their guys have played together. That goes away by January and certainly into early February. By that point, everybody's played together for a while. But I don't see any necessarily advantage for either Duke, UVA, or UNC because there are so many. I wouldn't say questions, just because there's no continuity, there's no chemistry built yet. They've got to build that chemistry. So I don't know that anybody has that much of a talent disparity over any of the others in that group of four, including Louisville. I think those are your four, and after that, Florida State's always got a lot of talent. I never count Leonard Hamilton out. Syracuse is going to be young this year for the most part. They lost some guys from last year. It's going to be a rebuilding effort for Jim Boeheim this time around, I think. I'm trying to think. There's, if there's any buzz around anybody else. I don't really. To me, I don't feel buzz around anybody else. So, this won't be one of the glory years for the ACC because it is sort of a rebuilding year, really up and down the conference. But yeah, I don't know that there's any. I think that the top four, from a talent standpoint, do separate themselves from the other 11. But I don't know between those top four if there's anybody really, to me, that has an advantage going into the season.
Yeah, you mentioned Syracuse, Chris. If I had a team that I would say I know the least about, I'm not sure that wasn't a complete roster flip for Boeheim. people exiting for different reasons, graduating. A couple of people left the program, and it seemed like he got some nice players coming back in. But other than his son, there's not a ton of returning players. So the good news is no one's got a lot of tape on Syracuse. The tough part is the way this season is set up to start with the earlier games, the earlier conference games. It's going to be interesting to see just what Syracuse does. And I have to think that Notre Dame is going to bounce back from the year that they had with all of the injuries in question. So I think that Notre Dame will.
Hey Jerry, if you can hear me, I heard a little squeaking, then I seem to have lost you. So if you can hear me, I don't know what happened there, but yeah, Notre Dame certainly there is a little bit of whatever the word buzz or whatever we might want to say about Notre Dame. There is they are sort of a poor man's Louisville, if you want to say. They do have a lot of guys coming back this year, and so yeah, Notre Dame. And again, that's the continuity of college sports is that the more you bring guys back, when you have players returning, that can be an advantage for you going in, even if maybe the talent level isn't quite what some of the other schools may have. Yeah, we're going to have to get Jerry back on the line here, so let's keep filibustering while we work on that. So, but yeah, it is it's that time of year. We're talking some basketball here, and it is one of the fun things. You can hear me getting Jerry back on the line here. I'm my own producer here on the podcast, so it's one of those things that you get to do fun sometimes. And I think Jerry, we had to rearrange our schedules a little bit here for my trip to DC for MLB, and we'll talk about that as we come up here. Let's see, is Jerry? So Jerry's back with us, and I was just filibustering my way through Jerry as we got you back on the line here. So yeah, I was talking about Notre Dame. Yeah, they're sort of in my view, sort of a Louisville light in the sense that maybe they're not as ballyhooed as Louisville, but they do have a lot of guys coming back, so that can be a help at least. Early in the season, they just have continuity that other schools might not have.
Well, it's going to be interesting, and I'm also looking forward to the women's side of things as it rolls out. But Chris, as we switch from basketball, we've got a pit stop to make before we get to football, and that's the postseason baseball stuff going on. And Chris, you're going to talk about the series as a whole with the Nats and the Dodgers. My lead question is, how long did the 7-run half innings feel like it took to play out there in Game 3?
It took a while. I mean, I don't know how long it was on the clock because, and the funny thing is, I'm totally bought in on what Davey Martinez, the Nationals manager, is trying to do. He tried to steal Game 3. And he tried to do so by, let's set it up. We won Game 2, so now, we're not going to get swept out of the series. Let's give Max one more day of rest. Let's give Strasburg one more day of rest. Because if you go with Max in Game 3, you've got to go Strasburg Game 4. And if you do that and you go into Game 5, then, no offense to Anibal Sanchez, 11-8 record in a regular season, but you don't want your season coming down to a guy with an 11-8 record. You'd rather have it come down to Strasburg if that's the case. So I saw what he was trying to do there. And Sanchez gave him 5 great innings, actually. 1 run in 5 innings. The only thing I questioned was I thought maybe he pinch hit for him a little too soon, pinch hit for him in the 5th inning. Sanchez had thrown 87 pitches. I thought he could maybe give him one more inning. But it's hard to quibble there, too. Sanchez in the 5th was starting to get hit. He gave up a solo homer, a couple of hard foul balls, hard line shots on foul balls. So maybe they saw something there and said, okay, we got to do something different. And you go Patrick Corbin, who had started Game 1, lost, but had pitched well, I thought, after a rough first inning. And Corbin just didn't have it. He said after the game that his slider wasn't biting. His slider is his best pitch. He still, though, had a runner on first base, 2 outs, and a 0-2 count on the hitter. I think it was Russell Martin. It was David Freese first. 0-2 count on David Freese, a pinch hitter. One more pitcher out of the inning. Just couldn't get that strike. Couldn't get the slider, which is his out pitch. His slider is in 2019 was the number 1 strikeout pitch in all of baseball. He had by far the most strikeouts on any one individual pitch of any pitcher in baseball with his slider. And so he just couldn't get it to bite. Just maybe it was the fatigue. He didn't blame it on that. He was bought into the strategy too. And what Martinez has done? He used Strasburg in relief in the wild card game. He used Scherzer in relief in game 2. They're trying to make up for having the worst bullpen in baseball by papering over it with starters. And so it didn't work. But I will say this too. I remember, and I'm going to talk now about baseball from bringing up an example from nearly a quarter century ago, but 1995 National League Championship Series, Atlanta Braves, St. Louis Cardinals. Cardinals up 2-1 in the series, and Bobby Cox, now Hall of Fame manager, had a chance to start, and I don't know what the order was in this, so I'm just remembering a little more generally here, but he had Maddox, Glavine, and Smoltz lined up to go, and those 3 guys end up in the Hall of Fame themselves. He had them lined up to go, and he could have put them. He could have started one of those 3 in Game 4, down 2-1, but decided to wait and go 5, 6, and 7 if not, if it got that far. And he went Denny Daigle in Game 4. They lost Game 4. They're down 3-1, but you still got 3 Hall of Famers, and they won. Those 3 guys won their games, and the Braves went on to win the World Series that year. I kind of looked at what Martinez did here, starting Sanchez in Game 3, and even if you lose, you still got Scherzer Game 4. You still got Strasburg Game 5. I kind of looked at that Dodgers Game 3 as a must-win for the Dodgers. They had to win that game. You can't go down 2-1 and then beat both Scherzer and Strasburg. If you can, awesome for you. But odds are you're not going to beat both those guys in back-to-back games. So Scherzer does what he needs to do, gives up a first-inning homer, goes 7 innings, gives up just that 1 run, and the Nats win 6-1. Now you've got a great matchup for Game 5. You've got Strasburg and Walker Buehler, both of whom won their games early in the series. Buehler, a great effort in Game 1. Strasburg, a great effort in Game 2. So, but no, it was to answer your question, Jerry. It was a long half inning, but the Nats did what they need to do. They held serve in Game 4, and now we're playing one game to see who goes to the next round. And the pressure's on the Dodgers, if you ask me. They're the team that won 106 games in the regular season. They've lost the last 2 World Series. That fan base is not going to accept another departure, and so it'll be interesting to see. They got all the pressure of the world on them. The Nats, a team that was 19-31 on May 23rd, they've been playing with house money for quite a long time. So I expect the Nats to go out there a little loose. I expect the Dodgers to, if there's anything to it, maybe be a little tight, and they have the home field advantage. But I think the Nats have the pitching advantage, and so Game 5 should be quite interesting.
Yeah, Chris, I have to believe, to expand on what you were saying, that when it comes to pressure, the gap here is enormous. You mentioned the back-to-back, World Series, coming up short at the end, and then being a heavy favorite in this one. I would have to think that while they're maybe not the Yankees of going out each year and saying World Series or bust, it's definitely been their mentality, and they've been on the cusp 2 years in a row. I think this would be a devastating loss for them, and I think that's going to be on their minds when they go out there tomorrow and try to play Game 5. Tell us a little bit about what the atmosphere was like up there for Game 3 and Game 4.
Oh, it was great baseball. Great atmosphere for baseball. Sellouts both nights. There actually technically were, I could visually see a few empty seats last night. But the games were officially sellouts, and great environment. People standing most of the game. And when the Nats, I don't think I've heard a louder sound. Well, in the last 6 months, I hadn't heard a louder sound. Back to April of earlier this year when UVA played Texas Tech in the Final Four championship game. But when Ryan Zimmerman hit the 3-run homer in the 5th inning to break that game open last night, that was pretty loud sound, and it was great too. This is a UVA sports podcast primarily. Ryan Zimmerman with a 3-run homer, a guy that he's been injured most of the season, really injured much of the last 3 or 4 years for the most part, and actually, had been replaced in the lineup for a while. Howie Kendrick has been hitting so well. Kendrick, a utility guy, but he's hitting close to 350 this year, and so you need to get his bat in the lineup. And he's been playing a lot of first base, but last night with the lefty starter Rich Hill starting, Davey Martinez put Kendrick, who is versatile enough to do this, he put him at second base, and then put Zimmerman in at first base to get another right-handed bat in the lineup. He could have gone with Brian Dozier at second base and Kendrick at first base, though. So a little bit of a gut call there on the part of Martinez to put Zimmerman in, and Zimmerman paying rewards. He had a couple hits last night, had a big 3-run homer. Sean Doolittle, then another UVA alum, of course, called after Scherzer, finished his 7-inning stint, giving up the 1 run. The maligned Nats bullpen, and Doolittle was a little part of that. ERA of over 4.05 ERA this year. And he lost his closer job after he went on the IL. But he came in and he pitched a perfect 8th, and then got the first out of the 9th before handing the ball over to Daniel Hudson to finish it off. So for UVA fans out there, Zimmerman with the big hit of the series so far for either team, and then Doolittle. Even though that Nats bullpen is as maligned as it is, and deservedly so, two nice innings from the bullpen last night to close that one out.
And so you got a pair of Game 5s tomorrow with sad for the Braves. They had a couple of chances last night to close their series out. They had a leadoff triple in one inning and a leadoff double in another. Couldn't come up with the winning run. So you got 2 Game 5s, and I know you're not following the Braves-Cardinals series quite as much, but give us a thumbnail breakdown, a preview of Game 5 out in L.A.
I'll even give some thoughts on Braves-Cardinals. The Nats played those teams within the last, say, 3 or 4 weeks, and so kind of familiar with both those sides. Those are good teams. I mean, what I love about these playoffs is there's no Cinderella. I don't even count Tampa Bay as a Cinderella. They might not be paid very much, but that's a pretty good team there in Tampa Bay, and they extended the Astros to a Game 4 in the ALDS. But Braves Cardinals, I love both those lineups. It's game in both, and I can say this generally about both Game 5s tomorrow. It's Game 5 of a 5-game series. This is Game 7 of a series, if you want to say that. You have to play with a Game 7 mentality. I saw the Nats play in that wild card game last week with a Game 7 mentality against the Brewers. Game 7s, Game 5s, wild card games, do or die baseball games. Everybody's got to be available. I mean, except for obviously the starting pitcher that you just used yesterday. Max Scherzer made it clear he's not pitching tomorrow. He's not going to be available to do anything tomorrow. Maybe bunt if you need him to pinch hit or maybe pinch run. Max is actually a pretty good base runner, but he's not pitching tomorrow. He made that very clear. But, I mean, everybody's available other than that. Walker Buehler starting for the Dodgers. So Clayton Kershaw is going to be part of that mix. For the Nats, Strasburg starts. Now, I think it's a good question. We know Scherzer not available, and then the other, Patrick Corbin was so ineffective on Sunday night that you have to wonder about whether or not he would be available to give maybe even just a – the Nats only have one lefty in the bullpen, Sean Doolittle. So can Corbin be called on to maybe in a lefty-lefty, 7th or 8th inning situation to get one out? Maybe. I happen to think he's more effective against righties with that slider. But so it'll be interesting to see that. But for the most part, everybody's available. You're playing this like it's. I mean, it is a championship game. You don't play anymore if you don't win this game. So. I don't know the pitching matchup in the Braves Cardinals. I do know the pitching matchup very well in this Dodgers Nats. I mean, Walker Buehler, I think it was 6 shutout innings in Game 1 in the win, and he came out amped. He throws hard anyway, but he was throwing the ball 100 miles an hour in the first inning. He's going to want to pace himself a little bit more. Strasburg's already pitched twice significantly in this playoffs. He pitched 3 scoreless innings in the wild card game in relief. He had the 6-inning stint in Game 2 in this series. So we know what we're getting with both these guys. It's not going to be an 8-7 game. It's going to be that game's going to come down to who can scratch something across early, if possible, to get a lead. If you can get an early lead and put pressure on the other side. The Dodgers have the advantage in the sense that their bullpen was 4th in the majors in ERA, and the Nats were again last in ERA this year. And so they have that disadvantage. And again, the Dodgers have the advantage in the fact that they'll have Kershaw available to come out of the pen for probably an inning or 2 if you need him, because he would be on rotation to start again, I believe, on Thursday. So you can get full Kershaw. I don't think Dave Roberts wants to. Ideally, Walker Buehler gets him a lead, and then you can use Kershaw in Game 1 on Friday. But Again, there's no game one if you don't get through this one. So, I'm now I'll wear my red and I'll wear my Nats colors and hats and logos and everything else and say I think the Nats are going to win this one. But I'll give the formula for how the Nats can win this one, how they have to win this one. Strasburg has to give you 7. He has to give you 7 innings, and then you almost need what you had last night. You need Doolittle in the 8th and Hudson in the 9th, some combination of those two guys getting you 6 outs. But it's going to be the same formula as last night. Your dominant starter has to give you 7 innings, and then you have to get a run or two off of Buehler, which is going to be hard. But if you do that, you can win this game 2-1, 3-2, and that's how you have to do it if you're the Nats. So the Dodgers, I think if they can get an early run or two off Strasburg, the pressure's on the Nats. And if you can get 6 or 7 out of Buehler, your bullpen can win this game for you. So that's the Dodgers formula. But I think it's going to be a game that comes down to the 8th or 9th inning, Jerry. I really think it's going to be a game that's decided late. We'll see if from a Nats fan's perspective, if Strasburg can give you those 7 and you can hold a lead late, I think you can do so if it's Doolittle and Hudson in the game.
It's going to be interesting, Chris, because we need to mention that because both series are going the distance, there will be no team with a decided advantage for the next round. And that's the one drawback that you have, especially in a 7-game series. If it goes the max and the other series ends 4 days early, then you've got your an opportunity to line up your pitching rotation and all that. So the good news is if the Nats can get by the Dodgers, they're going to be on the exact same schedule as the winner of the Braves-Cardinals game, and that should be that should be a little easy to the mind because you're correct, at least from my thought process. You've got to throw everybody who can throw minus who started game 4, and it ought to be a fun watch. For switching from baseball to ACC football, I want to throw some numbers at you here, and you tell me what you're going to attribute this to. There were 4 games that were ACC contests this weekend. I'm going to give you some numbers here. 35, 35, 28, and 20. Chris, those were the points scored in the fourth quarter of those games. I can never remember. The Virginia Tech game had 5 touchdowns. The Pitt-Duke game had 4 touchdowns. UNC Georgia Tech even managed 5 touchdowns. And the Louisville-Boston College game, actually 2 touchdowns and 2 field goals. So which would be the bigger surprise, the total points scored, or that it seemed like that it was almost defenseless football in the fourth quarter of each one of those games?
Yeah, I think it's the defenseless football. I mean, we had a limited schedule this week, but they were all such meaningful games. Maybe the Carolina-Georgia Tech game, not quite so much, but the other 3 games had such meaning to them. And you and I were texting back and forth, and then I just fell asleep before the end of it, and I missed obviously the great end to the Pitt-Duke game. Great for just college football fans, not for Duke fans, because Duke came all the way back from a 26-3 second-half deficit, took a lead, minute and a half to go, and then Pitt, who couldn't get out of their own way for a quarter and a half, suddenly figured out how to move the ball again. But you had Virginia Tech similarly. They lost a 28-0 lead and came back and won the game. Weird games, wild games, and turnover-ridden games. The Pitt-Duke game that you watched very thoroughly, just such a sloppy game turnover-wise. The Virginia Tech-Miami game, I mean, boy, from a statistical standpoint, dominated the line of scrimmage, but you can't give the ball away as many times as they gave the ball away. I think it was 5 turnovers in that game. You can't lose a turnover battle 5-0 and win the game, and they almost did. If they don't blow the extra point at the end and can stop Tech one more time, they would have lost the turnover battle 5-0 and won the game. So, wild football. It felt like Big 12 football for a weekend. I'm not sure if I like that very much, Jerry. I kind of like ACC football. I don't like the Big 12.
That was my comparison as well. A couple of things real quick on the Pitt-Duke game. The most astonishing thing to me, I asked you how long that top of the half inning felt like at the Nats game the other night. The first half of the Duke football game was as tough of a watch as I could ever remember. And before we gave up the game-winning drive, we were posed to win a game with 5 turnovers. We had 5 turnovers. I don't know how often you win a game having 5 turnovers, but it was kind of funny to go from 26-3 to 30-26. And, what ended up happening was Pitt started having the same turnovers. But when it came, I've said every year about the Pitt-Duke game, it just comes down to making one tackle. One tackle. And they went from not scoring a point for half the game to going 80 yards in less than a minute.
Yeah.
And on the third down play that gave up the play that gave up the touchdown, it was third and I want to say 7 or 8, and Cut decided to blitz. And the problem was when they blitzed, they missed him by half a second. He threw to a back that was wide open. But even then, Chris, they had him at the 18-yard line. All they have to do is tackle him. Now, Pitt would have still had time for another play. And, of course, the game ends when Harris gets crushed again and has the 6th turnover. It was just unbelievable from that standpoint to see each one of those games. Like I said, even the Georgia Tech-Carolina game that only had 60 points in the game had 35 of them at the end. I just, the Big 12 scenario, if it's on this point, it was just a crazy situation. Now, the Virginia Tech-Miami game, were you actually getting to watch that one?
Oh, yeah, I watched most of that one. I'll be honest, when it was 28-0, I started doing some other things while the game was on in the background. Miami scores the Hail Mary at the end of the first half. You start to, the writer in me says, okay, the door's a little ajar now. It's not quite open yet, but, they might be able to stick their toe in and see if they can knock it down a little bit. But that game was still 28-14 in the fourth quarter. It's not like, that opened the floodgates up and Miami stormed back at that stage. I remember there was one point, my wife and I, Crystal, were watching it, 28-14 still fourth quarter. I think actually Tech took a 35-14 lead in the fourth quarter. And we talked openly about, all right, in a minute or two, we're going to turn the Auburn-Florida game on. And the only reason I didn't was I said to Crystal, I'm an ACC guy. I want to see Miami a little bit more before I flip the channel. And it went from that within about, it felt like, you talk about the feeling like kind of time. I don't know if I ever answered your question about the baseball game. It felt like it went on for about 10 hours, that inning, by the way, Jerry. It felt like within 2 minutes of us just talking about changing to Auburn, Florida, it was 35-35. I don't know what happened. I mean, I was watching it. I just don't know what happened in that Tech game to turn that one around so quickly. And then just like that, it was over. That's what a wild. I mean, it's exciting. It's fun to watch. But from then you start when the analyst in me says there's a lot to correct. I got to watch the Miami Virginia Tech game from the Tech standpoint. They gave up over 550 yards of offense, I think it was. So you won the game. Congratulations. You still probably feel like crap. At least the coaching staff, because you didn't move the ball very well. They ate you up. They handed the ball to you 5 times and you won the game. You can't feel great about that. If you're Miami, you can't feel great because you handed the ball off to them 5 times. And you still don't have a quarterback. You still don't know what to do. Kosi Perry, sure, he had 400 and some yards passing. But he didn't start the game as a starter. When he starts as a starter, he was a starter last year. Got taken out. He got knocked out actually in the Virginia game last year. They can't go from week to week with a quarterback. It wouldn't surprise me if Friday night he ends up back on the bench. So neither of those teams can feel good about that game. And as exciting as it was to watch as a fan, it was just an ugly game from a pure game perspective.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how everything plays forward. And this week, we still don't have a full slate, but we have a lot closer one. And Chris, it's going to be spread out for us over 3 nights. And we won't spend a ton of time on the Thursday night contest, but you've got Syracuse, up and down Syracuse, going down to NC State. The line has NC State favored by 4.5. And give our listeners a reason to tune into this one.
Oh, let's see. Reason to tune into this one. Well, Um, Syracuse jury's still out, and I didn't think I'd say that a couple weeks ago. When they were after getting blown out by Maryland, a team that's been exposed since, and then obviously the bad loss to Clemson, but they're 3-2, and a win, they're 4-2. You can't turn your nose up to 4-2, I suppose. And NC State, I think the jury's still out there too. Let's see. So, what would my selling point be on this game? Well, there might not be a Game 5 between Houston and Tampa Bay on Thursday night. The NLCS doesn't start till Friday night. I don't know what the NFL game is, but I'm not a big NFL Thursday night game guy because the short weeks that they have to play. So, if you want to watch some sports, this is going to be your best option. That's my selling point there. I'm assuming Houston beats Tampa, so that's why I'm saying that.
Well, I think that the winner of that game is headed in the right direction. Again, if you mentioned, if it's Syracuse, they're 4-2, and the race is on to see who's the fourth best team in the ACC as a whole. Not breaking it down by division, but just the fourth best team, because the fourth and fifth best teams still get to go to some pretty decent bowl games. Yeah. Chris, if you had told me that I only got to talk about one thing the entire day, the one that shocked me, and it's still shocking me. Of course, the next game on the list is Friday, Virginia at Miami. Okay? Because here's the shocking thing to me. Miami favored by 1.5. In my wildest imagination, I cannot justify that. Can you straighten me out and tell me why Virginia would lose to Miami?
I can't. I guess that's Vegas saying that they're a 1.5. Virginia would be a 1.5 favorite on a neutral field and a 4.5 point favorite at home. No, I can't. This is where lines and FPI projections, football power index projections, can be an issue. I guess Miami, from a recruiting standpoint, has more talent, so you say, there you go, but. It's a Miami team that's 2-3. They're 0-2 in the ACC. They're coming off a short week when they played poorly, at least in terms of turning the ball over. Virginia's coming off a bye week. I don't know. I can't justify this in any way, shape, or form. But I mean, you are playing at Miami now. I say that you all you had to do was watch any of the game on Saturday when they played Virginia Tech and see that. The NFL stadium isn't full of very many fans, and there certainly were a lot of Tech fans there, and there were a lot of empty seats. There weren't many Miami fans at that game, and I know from experience. My wife is a Tech alum. Her sister is a Miami alum. My wife went and visited quite a bit when her sister was at Miami, and she says the only time that they really draw is when they play Florida State at home, and that's every other year. So they're not going to draw on Friday night against Virginia. There's too much to do on South Beach to go watch this game if you're at all inclined to be a Miami fan. Even I mean, you're not. There's much better stuff to do than watch Miami. Probably lose to Virginia. So it's not going to be an intimidating environment. They're not the better team, and Virginia might actually have more fans making the trek just because it's pretty cheap to fly to Miami from here. So we might have a home field advantage. So no, there's nothing I could say that could justify anything about Miami being favored or even really, a slight underdog in this game. They should be a pretty heavy underdog.
Chrissy, you mentioned the 2-3 record. They're 2 wins. Bethune-Cookman and one of the alphabetical Michigans, was it Central Michigan? And they struggled to win that one. Yeah. So you're 2-3. You don't have a huge fan base. You haven't won a meaningful game. I understand that the people in Vegas, and I love the numbers, and I understand you've got to lay numbers on it seems like 1,000 things a day. I just felt like that they missed this one, and I know that we'll break this one down in greater detail when we get back together later in the week. But as a quick note, again, I asked you, could you justify the line? What is the biggest concern that you have with the Cavs going down to South Beach to play the game?
The offensive line. It was announced that Tyler Fannin, backup center, is out for the season. The offensive line wasn't playing well anyway. Dylan Rinkensmeyer is now the backup at center. He's also the starting right tackle. So you're a little thin on the offensive line. That's and thin at a position that you've not been playing well at, and also is also just about the most important position unit on the field. I mean, fans, we love watching the ball. We watch the quarterback. We watch running backs and receivers. You watch the big hits on defense. You don't win games if your offensive line doesn't play well. And so, even though it's only one guy and it's a backup guy, losing some depth on the offensive line is a key. You got a couple true freshmen who are stepping up to take over positions on the two deep on offensive line for Virginia this week. And so, yeah, the line's been a concern. There's nothing new about that. Also, there is a concern, and again, this is me quibbling now. This is me being UVA football observer / fan, because I'm complaining about the backup center not being available. I'm going to complain about the backup quarterback not being available. Brennan Armstrong is still out. Turf toe injury dating back to the end of the UVA-Miami game week 2. So yeah, you're really hitting some high points here when you're complaining about the backup center and backup quarterback, and man, you're worried about that going in. But these are important positions. Your backup quarterback needs to be able to step in. Armstrong has stepped in, and when he does well. Lindell Stone will be the backup again this week, and he's a very different quarterback. I mean, Brennan Armstrong as a backup runs the offense very similarly to Bryce Perkins. Lindell Stone was recruited by the Mike London regime, and he's more of a drop-back quarterback. So it's a very different offense. If he has to come in and play, it's a very different-looking offense. And so you game plan for Perkins, and if you have to stick Lindell Stone in to play, you really have to change a lot of things up, and it might be a difficult transition. So yeah, those are the two concerns I've got going in, and I don't know. I mean, you can have concern about rust from a bye week, whatever lingering hangover there might be from the loss to Notre Dame, but there's concerns there too, and I do think though Miami coming off the short week after a sloppy performance. Pressure's definitely on Miami. Manny Diaz at 2-3 this year. Another loss, he'd be 0-3 in the ACC. He'd be 2-4 overall. At a program where officially Mark Richt retired, but it felt like he was run out of town after that season last year. They had higher expectations. They came in this year expecting to contend for the ACC Coastal. They lose this game, they're not only out of that race. I mean, they pretty much are now, but they lose this one. They're not only out of that race. They're probably not a bowl team this year, so pressure on Miami certainly going into this one.
Okay, one more, and this was just my useless note of the day. I thought it was kind of ironic that was Pitt. The game at Durham was their 6th game of the season, Chris. They have not had a bye week yet. It was game 6, and it was the first time that the team boarded a plane. They had played 4 home games, and their road game was at Penn State. Obviously, it wasn't a long plane ride in the deal, but it was kind of interesting. So everything Pitt's doing in the back end, almost all of it's going to be on the road. But we have 4 games on Saturday, and I want to go through them real quick as I think the level of interest, starting with Rhode Island at Virginia Tech. Tell me what you're thinking.
Rhode Island is 1-4. They're 0-3 in whatever conference they play in. They're an FCS team. Virginia Tech. Let's see if they can continue their bounce back. I don't know. It felt like, from a line of scrimmage standpoint, they still got dominated Saturday in the win against Miami. They took advantage of turnovers. Credit to them for doing that. You can't turn your nose up in the air. You win a game on the road in the ACC. You score 42 points. But yeah, they're still getting beat up at the line of scrimmage. So. This is a chance for Virginia Tech to beat up another team for a weekend and maybe build some confidence going down the stretch in ACC play.
But it's going to be interesting for sure because I think that while they've struggled early on with some other teams, I think the average fan base, average member of the fan base is going to be looking at this one going, here's an easy W. I'll be curious as to what the attendance is for the game. Again, if they had lost the Miami game after having a 28-zip lead, I'm not sure that you couldn't have held the game in a phone booth as far as fan base goes. But coming off of a win, I'll be anxious to see what kind of turnout Virginia Tech gets for Rhode Island. Chris, the next one I want to ask you about, and the line on this one has Duke as a 17.5-point favorite. They're home again this week. to Georgia Tech. Now, Georgia Tech has, we've talked all along about their struggles, and they actually stayed, somewhat competitive with North Carolina. But what are your thoughts on Duke as a 2.5 touchdown favorite at home over Georgia Tech?
Georgia Tech lost to the Citadel. The Citadel lost to VMI. Go Keydets! Those are some of my thoughts. Actually, that was a big win for VMI. VMI, it's one of those rivalry games where you give out a trophy at the end. In this series, it's called the Silver Shako. The two military schools, VMI and Citadel, and VMI had not won the Silver Shako since 2002. So that Georgia Tech team lost to the team that lost to VMI, who's now 3-3 overall. So go Keydets. And Georgia Tech, they put some meaningless points on the board against North Carolina this past weekend. And I say meaningless. The game was over. Mac Brown played it like NFL team would play it. We're winning. We'll play prevent defense. We don't care. We're going to win the game. Georgia Tech might feel good that they scored, I think, 22 in that game. You don't get too happy about the 22 though. This is a chance for Duke to just kind of lick their wounds, get a win, hopefully escape without any injuries of note, and then get ready for UVA the following week.
The last two are intriguing for two completely different reasons. Louisville coming off their big home win over Boston College at Wake Forest. And Chris, the early line is Wake Forest by 6.5. So you've got an undefeated Wake Forest team, Louisville team that had a statement win. They're coming into this game with a little momentum. Are we going to find out how good Wake Forest is, or do you think that they're going to actually be able to go in there and take care of business?
Intriguing matchup, yeah. Scott Satterfield, I've said since the ACC kickoff how impressed I am with him, and I didn't expect that they would win a lot of games this year. They've already won 3, and it would not surprise me to see the Cardinals go into Wake Forest and pull off the upset. I hate to be that way about Wake. And it's maybe just because their name's Wake. Maybe if these kids wore a different uniform, they were a different school, and the same kids and same coach were, had different names, I would be like, oh, this Wake team's really good. But I've been saying for a while, at least right now, statistically, best quarterback in the ACC is Jamie Newman, the Wake Forest quarterback. Great numbers. But to me, you gotta win. Obviously, you gotta win this game. And it's not gonna be as easy. Before the season, oh God, before the season, I can't believe I would have said, wow, ranked Wake Forest. Is not going to have an easy time with Louisville. Those words were not envisioned by me coming out of my mouth as we will be talking in October. That ranked Wake Forest will have to hold off a game Louisville team to go 6-0 and all this stuff. But this is a good matchup, and to me, I understand odds and everything else. To me, I think either team can win this game. It should be a fun game.
Yeah, I'm not sure it wouldn't be the most entertaining one of the weekend. It's good because I am expecting Virginia and Duke to both win their games comfortably. But my question now, and for years, Chris, this next one carried the league. Florida State at Clemson. I was a little surprised. I think Florida State's playing a little bit better, but the line here is Clemson by 27. I think the margin's too big. But give me your breakdown on what this matchup used to mean to the league and where it is now. How interested will you be in this game on Saturday?
Oh, very interested in the game because that's an absurd line. This is a Clemson team coming off a bye after a narrow win at North Carolina. Now, yeah, you can say off a bye, and I'm sure Dabo's had some fun practices for his team the last 2 weeks as a result of their poor performance in that one. But I've been saying since I saw Florida State in Charlottesville back in early September, I guess it was middle September, that to me that's an 8-win looking team. I don't know schedule-wise if that is going to add up, but because they had a couple losses they shouldn't have had necessarily, but that's an 8-win looking team to me, and they're not going to lose this game by 4 touchdowns. I think this is a competitive game. I really do. Florida State, from a talent standpoint, not quite the equal of Clemson, but I think from a talent standpoint, they are as close to an equal to Clemson as anybody in the ACC. I think they're from just a pure talent standpoint, the second most talented team in the ACC. I'd put Miami third from a talent standpoint. But I think there's a gulf between Florida State and Miami in terms of just pure talent. And so, which Clemson team shows up? Is it the Clemson team that really was impressive in the win over Texas A&M that really beat the heck out of Syracuse, or is it the team that sleptwalked through almost upset loss in Chapel Hill? Again, I'm sure Dabo's had some fun times for his guys the last couple weeks. There may have been some trash cans on the sidelines for throw up after you had to run a bunch of sprints, but you still got to go out there and play football. And I think Florida State's too talented to have this game be the walkover that the Vegas odds makers think. 5 years ago, this was the matchup in all of college football. This one and Alabama LSU were the two big games of the year, the two big annual rivalry games of the year. It just happened that they're both in this, they were each of those teams were in the same division competing for division championships in their respective conferences. But this one outstripped Florida State Clemson there for a 3 or 4 year period, was better than Alabama LSU because the winner of that game went to the playoff. Guaranteed. They were going to be undefeated and go to the playoff. And so, and I think there was 1 year Florida State won the game and Clemson lost and still went to the playoff. So 1 year we had both these teams. Two of these four, these two teams in this game were both in a 4-team playoff. So this is from a talent standpoint, still a good matchup. And I think it's going to be a better game than I guess the Vegas folks think.
Yeah, I'm disappointed in the line for the fact that I feel like it puts Dabo and his kids in almost a no-win situation. Florida State, again, as you said, if you go off the recruiting charts and all of the numbers, Clemson is not 4 touchdowns better than Florida State. So now if Clemson doesn't cover, then it looks like they had another quote-unquote down week. Yeah. I think it's an unrealistic number for sure. Hey, quick update on the WNBA. Della Don did her best Willis Reed impersonation, came back out for Game 3, and after they didn't think she would, they won the game. So tonight, Chris, is Game 4. The Washington Mystics have not won a WNBA championship. They'll have a chance to bring one to the area tonight. The game is up in Connecticut, and if need be, Game 5 will be back in the D.C. area. Chris, I've got 2 left. One I want to have some fun with, and the second one I'm gonna let you seriously break something down. The first one, now, I didn't watch any of the NFL game last night because I was working on our deck, but I did get to see the highlights, and I was wondering what your take was on Nick Bosa getting his payback a few years later by mimicking the flag plant after sacking Baker Mayfield.
I didn't watch the game either since I was in Nats Park, but I did see the highlights, saw the coverage this morning when I was getting some work done before heading back from D.C. back to Virginia. And so there was that. There was the flag plant. There was apparently Richard Sherman making some issue about the fact that Baker Mayfield, after shaking hands before the coin toss, didn't shake hands after the coin toss. And then Richard Sherman making some big deal about, well, all you guys picked us to be bad and keep picking us to be bad, whatever. I don't know. I mean, I guess if guys get motivation from certain things, if Bosa, was motivated to sack Baker Mayfield so he could act like he was planting a flag, if that's what he needs to get up for a game, that's what he needs, and that's fine. I shouldn't quibble with that. I kind of want to, but I shouldn't. If Richard Sherman needs to feel disrespected that he thinks that Baker Mayfield was not honoring the intent of the game as a young player to shake hands with people twice instead of just once, if that's what it takes for Richard Sherman seems to need to get angry at people so he can play better. He had an interception, so good for him. If that's what he needed, that's what he needed. I tend to think it's very asinine of Sherman to act the way he does. He's a very smart guy. You don't get a Stanford degree if you're not. He's a very talented player. All those years in Seattle, he is an uber talented guy, but he can be so juvenile at times. I don't know much about the Bosa guy yet, except for the fact that, it's a nice troll if nothing else. But I just tend to think, I don't know, it's all about me too. Look at me, put the spotlight on me, everything else, and just go out and play football. They don't like Baker Mayfield. Great. I think Baker Mayfield's great for football. But I also think Richard Sherman could be great for football. The Bosa's in general are pretty good for football. But I just wish that they'd actually just play the damn game instead of trying to shine a spotlight on themselves. Because there's enough of a spotlight. The NFL's already got pretty big spotlight it can give you. That's sort of my take. I just thought it was very juvenile on everybody's part there.
Baker Mayfield, looking at the stat line, had a pretty humbling game.
He did. Oh, yeah.
But I don't think I think he's got a short-term memory. I think he'll shake that one off and be ready for the next one. And it's funny, Chris, from the outside looking in, if you don't deep dive the NFL, you're trying to separate Johnny Manziel from Baker Mayfield. The fact that they were both Heisman Trophy winners, they were both small players, they both ended up in Cleveland. And the amount of hype that started out with Cleveland this year, all of the smack talk, that part I'm kind of thinking it would be like Daniel Jones after winning 2 games. If he started saying, this league's full of blah, 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 and we're going to blah, blah, there's not a lot of humility there. And humility is a good thing. And that's the other news break from the NFL. Daniel Jones will not go undefeated in his NFL career. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Chris, this one's a little bit more serious, and I'm going to just listen to you on as we wrap up the podcast. But I don't know how much of a dive you've taken into everything that took place in China in reference to the Houston Rockets. I figured if anybody could break this down so that the average person could understand the significance of it, you could put on your political hat for a minute and walk me through this.
Yeah, I have. I've been following this closely. As a big NBA fan, also as fan of democracy, fan of freedom of speech. The story is Daryl Morey, the Rockets GM, tweeted and then deleted the tweet expressing support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. An ongoing situation, dating back. I mean, this isn't something that's really new. I think we're talking about the late 90s here. Hong Kong, a former British province, but of course located, right there on the Chinese mainland. And I think the transfer of power from Britain to China dates back to 97 or 98. So we're talking 20 plus years. But there was a window, and I want to say, it came up just in the last, few months, where Hong Kong, which again, was under the British rule, but it was a self-rule kind of thing where that province was able to, elect its own leaders, etc. Well, that's gone away, and now it's Hong Kong has been subsumed back within China's totalitarian government. So obviously, folks who've lived for generations under a more Western approach to self-governance, it's been obviously a very difficult situation for those folks to deal with. China as an authoritarian, totalitarian regime. Famously, things like Google, they have their own search engines, they have their own social media. Western influences are considered very negative, and so in this context, though, China also has billion plus citizens / consumers for Western businesses to try to make money with, and there's also a billion folks in India. The NBA also playing some exhibition games in India this year. India is a more Western leaning country, so with the that history of British rule and a more democratic system of government certainly than China. So, but there's 2 billion people combined between those two countries, and the NBA, among others, are trying to figure out ways to make more money by having access to more people. And if you could, that's roughly a third of the people on the planet are either in India or China. 1/6 of them are just in China. So what happens then is if you're okay with India, it's relatively easy. Again, a pro-Western, Western-leaning, democratically elected government there. Not a hard situation at all to deal with India. In China, billion people, totalitarian government, freedom of expression not valued there, and so as a result, when you do business with China, you got to be very careful if you're an American company, because obviously we have different ideals here. We have different ideas and ideals as to how things are supposed to go in certain ways. So, you know, when you're Major League Baseball, you know, if you're the NFL, the NBA's made the most inroads. The NBA, I think the NBA is, gosh, they're far and above any American-based sports franchise, organization, league in terms of its business outreach, just worldwide in general. The NFL has played some football games, has played regular season football games for a long time in England, but the World League of American Football didn't take off. So, you know, American football, still American football. Basketball, though, the NBA, I mean, I've seen this before. There are more NBA fans in China than there are in the United States, in part because China has a bigger population, but they love the NBA. And so you have a chance this preseason to, you know, have some games out there. The NBA had worked out an initiative. In fact, they were supposed to do some training, opening a training center, which has been scuttled by this Daryl Morey controversy. But you know, the NBA has reached out and is trying to reach out. So, I mean, Daryl Morey wasn't trying to cause controversy. He was just expressing, hey, you know, I'm sympathetic to the pro-democracy forces in Hong Kong. Fertitta, the owner of the Rockets, says we're not a political organization. Suddenly, there's coverage mode. There's PR disaster coverage mode. The NBA is trying to make amends. You know, it was so awkward though to see, you know, the commissioner talking about how Yao Ming is angry with the NBA right now, and they're trying to make amends to him. And Yao Ming, the former Rockets star center, who, you know, one of the NBA legends who came from China, and very influential figure in Chinese basketball now that he's retired from the NBA. It's so awkward, Jerry. This is you know, I understand the NBA is between rocks and hard places and everything else right here. You want to continue a potentially very, very fruitful business relationship with a country, though, that doesn't value the business relationship as much as it wants to make sure that it keeps its people in the dark about a lot of things. And so, you know, so there are people here in the States that are very offended by that. And what's interesting about this, Jerry, is I've been reading about this on political blogs. There isn't much that unifies people on the right and the left of the spectrum here politically in the United States, but this is one of those issues that does. Everybody from MSNBC to Fox News commentators, from the New York Times to the New York Post, agrees that the NBA is playing this wrong. That you cannot kowtow to a communist totalitarian government in terms of how it treats freedom of expression and things of that nature. And so this is a very rare public relations loss for the NBA, and I don't know what they do to fix it, because you know, here we are on the verge of a season that is, from a fan standpoint, could be a very interesting basketball season with so much uncertainty. For the first time in forever, we don't start a season thinking Golden State's going to win the championship. There's new players in big markets. Should be very exciting from start to finish NBA season, and here we are starting with this controversy over politics, and not even Republican or Democratic politics, or Trump or no Trump, or kneeling for an anthem or anything like that, but involving, you know, a foreign country that, you know, it seems like left and right agree on something, and we're mad at the NBA universally. So, wow, this is, I don't, you know, I've worked in media for 25 years. I also, you know, our company, Augusta Free Press, advises several clients on PR strategies. I don't know what I would tell them to do here, Jerry. I don't know what I would say. NBA, here's how you fix it. I don't know how you fix this. This is a tough one. And so it'll be interesting to see how they play it. I don't think they're going to play it well, though.
It's going to be interesting because, of course, I'm partial to Adam Silver because of that Duke piece of paper he's got hanging on his office wall. But I've been looking at this going, I don't know how Duke's going to win this one. It's a situation to where you are correct. It's the rare thing where it seems like everybody's offended by this. And maybe that's a good thing then, that we're united on something as a country. But how do you undo this? The GM, it was within his rights to make the statement. I'm asking that as a question.
Yeah. I would like to think so. If not, then the NBA's got an even bigger issue. He is, and that's if I'm breaking down where this went wrong, I would say that's where it starts. Was not when he made the statement, but when the owner so quickly backtracked and said he was wrong to make that statement. We're not a political organization. At that stage, you gave the Chinese side of this legitimacy and now they are asserting their will. I mean, they're canceling things. They canceled the G League exhibition games that were scheduled. They canceled this education initiative from getting started. Once Fertitta, and I don't have his first name, but I think it's the same family that has the dealings with UFC. But once he stepped back and said, "Nah, can't say that." Boy, you gave the totalitarian regime in China every bit of ammunition to use against the NBA. You gave them the wedge, and China's China. They're good at using wedges. That's why they're still there, and they've used President Trump's call for a trade war against President Trump, and now he's losing that battle. So I mean, you don't mess with these people. They're pretty good at using their wedges when they can. They have 1 billion people on their side. But yeah, I think that's where the battle started to begin to be lost.
So we started with some ACC hoops, and we wrapped it around to issues with China. I think we did our job today, Chris. I'm not sure, and I got a hunch that when we get back together on Friday, that I am assuming the first thing we're going to talk about is Game 5 Nats-Dodgers.
Well, there's that, and also we got that night. We've got UVA-Miami. We could, it depends on how tomorrow night goes in LA. We could have Nats and either Nats Braves, Nats Cardinals to talk about. So, man, there's a lot coming up. Plus, a busy ACC football weekend and all that. So yeah, this was a good one to get caught up on because we got a lot to catch up back on Friday as well.
Always enjoyable. Looking forward to Friday already.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for your time and guest hosting, co-hosting this podcast as you always do. And thanks for our listeners out there as well. Thank you for tuning in. And check out Augusta Free Press. We'll have a breakdown of Game 5 between the Nats and Dodgers. We'll have that on the website. We have all the ACC basketball, Operation Basketball transcripts of some columns coming up on that. And get you ready for UVA-Miami. A lot still to come this week from us here on Augusta Free Press. For Jerry Carter, I'm Chris Graham signing off. Have a great day, everybody.